On the SSAT verbal section, there are almost guaranteed to be words that you will not know. Today, we'll talk about what do you do when you encounter those words, particularly in the synonym section, that are unfamiliar to you. So overall, whenever you don't know a word, your goal should be to eliminate as many answer choices as possible. That way, you can increase your probability of, even if you have to make an educated guess, you are more likely to get that guess correct. We'll talk through 4 elimination strategies that you can use to help you increase that probability. So our first strategy is to consider context. This works best when you have a word that you've heard before but maybe couldn't give an exact definition for. So let's look at an example question where we could use this strategy. So our word in this question is sentient. So if I think of where I've heard sentient before, I've almost always heard it in the context of beings. So maybe it's when we're like looking for life on other planets. Maybe it's when we're talking about like animals compared to other things. That would be the context I think of that word in. So I'm going to go through my answer choices and see, does the context for some of these answer choices kind of match up to that? So recant, I always think of that in terms of testimony. That's often where I've heard that. So that probably doesn't have anything to do with sentient beings. If I think of probationary, I always think of that of like people coming out of jail, which again, probably not going to match up with that sentient context. Solicit, I always think of those no soliciting signs outside of businesses saying you can't sell things there. Again, probably not necessarily going to have to do with my context for sentient. Tangential, this typically has to do with things like lines in math, thinking tangent, which again, not quite, I don't think what we're going for. Then E, cognizant. If I look at the root cog here and then think of my context, this always has to do something with the mind, right? So if I look at that, that seems like it could potentially have something to do with sentient. And in actuality, it does. Sentient beings are those that can feel things, as, you know, think an animal opposed to a rock. And cognizant would mean you have a mind, you can make decisions, you can think, you can perceive things. So those would actually be the best synonyms for each other in this question. Our second strategy is to use word roots. So to do this, you're going to try to break a word down into its parts and see if you can identify the meaning of those individual parts. If you're stuck on that, try to think of similar words that use those same parts and see if that helps you out. This may not work on every single word. Not every single word on the SSAT is going to use Greek or Latin roots, but it may help you eliminate some answers on some of the questions. So let's take a look at our practice word with cacophony. So right away, I see the root phone, which I know means sound. So I'm going to keep that in mind as I go through my answer choices. If we look at A, anaerobic, I can break this one down into 2 roots, an, which means not, and then aerobic, if I think even of doing aerobic exercise, it means oxygen. So something that doesn't need oxygen. Probably not going to have anything to do with sound, so I'm going to eliminate that. B, discord. Again, 2 roots to this one. Dis is not. And then chord, think of like cordial, meaning kind of friendly, or accord, meaning agreement. So that chord root is kind of, I'm going to think along the lines of agreement here. So could I have sounds that are not in agreement? Well, possibly, right? Maybe they're not in harmony. Maybe they don't really agree with each other. So that seems like it could be possible. C, amorphous. A, another example of a root that means not. Morph, I know means form, and then this OUS ending just is going to signal that this is an adjective. So amorphous, meaning without form. Well, a sound kind of is without form, right? So maybe, I won't eliminate it yet, it's possible. D, exonerate. This X, EX, is yet another example of a root that means not. O-N-E-R. For this one, think like the word onus. If you have ever heard of put the onus on someone, it's typically meaning like the burden or the responsibility. So I'm going to think of that as I'm doing this. And then A-T-I-O-N just means that this is a noun. So thinking exonerate means not responsible. We actually often use this in law to signal that someone is not guilty for a crime. That doesn't seem to have anything to do with sound, though, so I'm going to eliminate that one. And then fictitious. Fict, I automatically think of fiction, right? Something that is imaginary. And then this, again, IOUS root is just going to show that this is an adjective again. So probably not having anything to do with sound. So I'm going to eliminate that option. So I'm left with B, discord, or C, amorphous. Well, if I go back to my word, this CAC root is kind of an advanced word root here, and it actually means bad. So thinking bad sound between discord and amorphous, discord is going to be a better answer, right? Meaning sound that is not in agreement, not in harmony. The third trick for synonyms is to determine the part of speech of both the word in the question and all of the answer choices. The correct answer should match the same part of speech as the word in the question. So for example, if the word in the question is a noun, the correct answer choice should be as well. So let's try this out with the word volatility. One of the things I'm going to pay attention to as I do this is the word endings. Even if I don't know the definition of a word, I should be able to figure out the part of speech by looking at the suffix to the word. So let's use the example volatility. This ity ending reminds me of words like calamity and civility, and it's one of the clues that this word is a noun. So that means I'm going to eliminate any answer choice that also isn't a noun. So if I look at A, capriciousness, this NESS ending reminds me of happiness or loneliness, and those are all nouns as well. If I look at B, premonition, this TION ending reminds me of words like nation or abolition, which are also, again, nouns. Now, if I look at C, bootless, this less ending reminds me of words like baseless or groundless, which are both adjectives. So that means I can eliminate that one. D, ardently, this ly is maybe one of the most famous suffixes that shows that this word is an adverb. Think words like happily or sadly are also adverbs, so I can eliminate that one. And then D, E, differentiate, this ate ending shows that this is a verb. Think other words like appreciate or delegate. Those are also verbs. So now, even if I didn't know any of the definitions of these words, I know that A and B are my only good answers here. Now, if you were going to figure out what the correct answer for this is volatility, think volatile, like a volcano about to explode, right? It's unpredictable. You don't quite know what's going to happen. The best answer to match that would be capriciousness. If something is capricious, it is also unpredictable. It changes very quickly. You don't quite know what to expect. We could also figure out the word premonition and verify that this one is incorrect by this prefix, which means before. If you think like the preface to a book comes before the main part of the story. And a premonition is something that you kind of have a feeling about before it happens, almost like foreshadowing. All right, let's move on to our fourth and final strategy, which is know when to move on. So on the SSAT, you get 1/4 point off for any answer that you answer incorrectly and 0 points off for any answer that you leave blank. Now, don't let that scare you. If you can eliminate 1 or 2 answers, you should still guess on a question. The probability is good enough that it's worth the risk. However, if you cannot eliminate anything, don't guess randomly and don't waste your time on a question. Move on to one that you can figure out. So let's use attenuate as our example. If I don't know what the word attenuate means, I can maybe figure out with that ate ending that it's a verb. And if I look at my answer choices, I can maybe recognize that this en root means to move something into, think like encapsulate means moving something into a capsule, same meaning. But when I look at the rest of my answer choices, I can't eliminate anything. This would be a great time to skip this question and move on. So you do know for next time, attenuate means to weaken something. And the best synonym for that is actually going to be A, enfeeble. You're moving something into feebleness or weakness. We have a few final reminders for you as we finish off this video. First, it bears repeating. You most likely won't know every word on the SSAT, and that's okay. That's why we made this video. When you're prepared for that reality, you are much more likely to be strategic and not get flustered when you encounter one of those words you don't know. Second, make sure you're eliminating as you go. Use context, word roots, and parts of speech like we practiced, and actually cross off the answers that you know are not true. It's going to make your life much, much easier when you don't have to figure out and redo the logic multiple times because you didn't cross off an answer. Third, Make sure you skip strategically. If you can't eliminate any answers, it's okay to move on and not waste your time. And then finally, study those words you didn't know. If you come across a word that's new to you, add it to your list of vocab that you're memorizing so you will know it for next time. With all of these tips and tricks, you should hopefully get just a few more synonym questions right on the SSAT.